Normandy, July 1944. The city of Caen smoldered beneath a sky of drifting ash. For weeks, Allied bombers had pounded its stone walls and slate roofs into rubble, leaving behind a landscape of broken chimneys and hollowed churches. What once had been a bustling Norman town now resembled a graveyard of stone, where every ruined window seemed to conceal a rifle barrel and every rooftop whispered danger. The air reeked of smoke and cordite, a permanent haze that clung to uniforms and lungs alike. Along the shattered streets, civilians clung to survival in darkened cellars. Women shushed frightened children while old men bartered scraps of bread for safety. Overhead, the sharp echo of gunfire snapped through the ruins, and each report carried the same unspoken truth. Somewhere, a German sniper still hunted. Corporal Daniel MacLeod advanced through this wasteland with deliberate caution. He was no stranger to rifles. He had grown up in the Canadian wilderness, a farm boy who once tracked deer across frostbitten forests. The rifle he carried now was not the sleek, factory-issued Lee Enfield favored by his fellow soldiers, but an old hunting piece, worn smooth by years of use. It had belonged to his father, and though officers scoffed at its age, Daniel trusted it. The rifle had never failed him, and neither had the instincts that came with it. But Caen was no hunting ground. Here, the prey was armed, cunning, and ruthless. Whispers had spread through the ranks of a Waffen-SS marksman, a shadow on the rooftops who had already claimed several Allied officers with uncanny precision. Men muttered of him in hushed tones, a phantom who could kill without being seen, a hunter who never missed. For Daniel, it was not just rumor. It was a challenge. He reached the edge of a blasted courtyard and sank to one knee, peering through a gap in the rubble. The silence pressed heavy on his ears, broken only by the distant rumble of artillery. Then, just as his breath steadied, something flickered against the skyline, a subtle shift, the faintest movement on a rooftop shattered by shellfire. Daniel's pulse quickened. The ghost of Caen had revealed himself, and the duel was about to begin. Long before Daniel MacLeod wore khaki or shouldered the burden of war, he had walked the silent forests of Nova Scotia with his father. Dawn would spill pale light across the pines, breath clouding in the cold, and Daniel would trail a half-step behind the old man. His father never spoke much during those hunts. Lessons were taught not with words, but with silence. How to read the bend of grass for the trace of a hoof. How to feel the faint shift of wind on one's cheek and know where a scent would carry. How to wait without fidgeting until patience itself became a weapon. Daniel remembered one morning when they had tracked a bull elk across frozen ground. Hours passed with no sign but faint prints and broken branches. The boy's legs ached, and he longed to move faster, but his father placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "The woods reward silence, not haste," the man had whispered. Moments later, the elk appeared between the trees, unaware of the hunters. One clean shot, and the lesson was burned into Daniel's soul: survival belonged to the patient. Years later, in basic training, instructors had mocked his old hunting rifle and his woodsman's instincts. They drilled him in rapid-fire marksmanship, in textbook range finding. Yet Daniel knew that nothing in a manual could teach the stillness of a hunter or the certainty of a single, perfect shot. Those lessons, dismissed as provincial, were the very ones that now kept him alive in Caen. The ruined bell tower of St. Etienne offered a vantage point above the gutted city. Daniel climbed its splintered stairs, boots careful on the stone, and settled behind a jagged arch where the church's bells once hung. Through the fractured skyline, he searched for the phantom sniper. The air hung heavy with tension. Every shattered window was an eye, every roof beam a potential perch. His heart beat slow, controlled, as he adjusted the rifle to his shoulder. Somewhere out there, another man, just as skilled, just as patient, was watching him, hunting him. The silence cracked. Stone burst inches from his temple, shards slicing his cheek. The sound came a heartbeat later, the whip crack of a rifle echoing across the ruins. Daniel froze. The duel had begun in earnest. The shot that splintered stone beside Daniel's head was more than a warning, it was a declaration. Somewhere beyond the haze of dust and broken rooftops, a German sniper had him squarely in his sights. Daniel pressed against the cold arch of the bell tower, forcing his breath steady. The city below seemed unnervingly still, save for the distant rumble of tanks and the occasional rattle of machine gun fire. Civilians huddled in cellars, Allied infantry pinned in alleys, all wary of a single unseen hunter. One man with a rifle had silenced a city street. Daniel scanned the horizon, scope gliding from chimney to shattered window. He knew the rhythm. The German would fire, relocate, and wait. Every rooftop could hide the muzzle that had nearly ended him. Daniel shifted, keeping his silhouette low, and drew a bead on a crumbling warehouse. Nothing. Then, from the corner of his eye, he caught it, a faint glint like sunlight kissing glass. His finger tightened on the trigger, but the flash vanished, too late. A crack split the air and a brick exploded inches from his elbow. He rolled back, heart hammering, a grim smile tugging at his lips. This enemy was skilled, cold, patient, disciplined. Daniel imagined him now, a young SS marksman lying prone on some roof beam, calm as ice, adjusting his scope with steady hands. Two hunters separated by rubble and ideology, yet bound by the same craft. The duel stretched on in suffocating silence. Each time Daniel shifted, a shot answered, close enough to remind him how narrow the margin was between life and death. The church bell tower shook with the impact of near misses, dust cascading down like rain. He returned fire, but the German moved like a ghost, never in the same place twice, always one step ahead. Minutes bled into eternity. Daniel's nerves thrummed like a wire, yet his mind sharpened with each heartbeat. This was no battlefield anymore, it was a contest of wills. Somewhere out there, through the haze, the enemy lay watching him through a crosshair. Perhaps even now the German's finger hovered on the trigger, waiting for Daniel to twitch, to breathe wrong, to falter. Then it came again, a flicker at the edge of vision. A faint flash of glass where a broken rooftop met the gray sky. Daniel swung his rifle, sight locked, and squeezed the trigger. The shot roared, but the glint vanished in the same instant. His bullet shattered empty tiles. The ghost had slipped away. Daniel abandoned the bell tower, knowing he had become a marked silhouette. He slipped through the shell of a half-destroyed house, boots crunching across broken glass. Every movement was careful, every breath measured. Then a crack, wood exploded above him. A timber beam splintered, raining dust and shards across his helmet. He dropped flat, lungs heaving against the grit in the air. The German was close, watching his every step, firing with surgical precision. Only chance had spared him from joining the dead that littered Caen's streets. Crawling low, Daniel moved deeper into the ruins. The silence weighed heavy, broken only by the creak of settling stone. Then, faintly, a sound that did not belong to war, muffled sobs. He followed the noise to a cellar doorway half hidden beneath rubble. Inside, 3 children huddled in the dark. Their faces were pale, streaked with soot, their eyes wide with terror. A girl clutched a cracked porcelain doll, holding it as if it could shield her from the war outside. Daniel lowered his rifle, crouched, and offered a reassuring smile he did not truly feel. From his pocket, he produced the last of his rations, a square of chocolate, wrapped in foil worn thin from weeks in the field. He broke it into pieces, placing it gently into their trembling hands. For a moment the world outside ceased. The children ate, slow and careful, as if savoring a treasure. One boy, no older than 10, whispered in broken English. His small finger pointed upward toward a shattered rooftop across the street. "The German," he breathed. "With the eagle patch, he watches from there." Daniel's blood chilled. The phantom was no longer rumor, no longer faceless. The enemy had a perch and witnesses. The duel was drawing closer. The children's warning gnawed at Daniel as he slipped back into the open. If the German held the rooftop, there was only one way to flush him out, to climb higher, risk exposure, and meet the phantom at equal height. He scaled a half-collapsed stairwell, emerging onto a roof of fractured tiles. The city stretched beneath him in jagged lines of stone and smoke, a battlefield frozen in uneasy silence. His boots crunched against loose slate, the sound thunderous in his ears. Each step threatened to betray him. Half-crouched, he moved across the peak. Then the world snapped into chaos. A rifle barked, and a bullet tore through the tiles beside him, showering sparks and shards. Instinct dropped him flat. The sudden weight sent shingles tumbling from the roof, clattering into the street far below. Daniel's pulse hammered as he pressed against the tiles, cheek grazing the grit. The German was watching, waiting. Every movement had to be deliberate, every angle considered. This was no longer a battlefield but a chessboard, each man anticipating the other's gambit. He edged forward, eyes searching the maze of rooftops. A chimney here, a shattered dormer there, all could hide the enemy's barrel. He shifted, angled his rifle, and then paused. The hairs on his neck prickled. Something was wrong. The German knew. He had mapped Daniel's position, calculated the only angle from which he could rise to return fire. Through the ruin across the street, Daniel glimpsed it, the faint outline of a rifle, steady and unhurried, aimed not where he was now, but where he had to be in order to shoot. The trap was sprung. Pinned against the cold slope of the rooftop, Daniel's breath slowed to a hunter's rhythm. His father's words returned to him as clearly as if whispered in his ear across the years. A deer always looks where it expects danger, but death comes from silence. The lesson was not about animals anymore. It was about survival, about striking from where no man expected. He eased backward, sliding his helmet from his head. Its dull steel was dented, scuffed, already marked by near misses. Carefully, he lifted it with the edge of his rifle barrel and nudged it above the jagged chimney beside him. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then the world cracked. A rifle barked, and the helmet spun away, stone exploding in a spray of shards. The German had fired true and wasted his chance. Daniel rolled to the side, chest pressed flat against the grit, and inched into a new angle of attack. His old hunting rifle settled into his shoulder like an extension of his body. The stock was worn smooth from years of use, the iron sights etched deep into his memory. He inhaled once, slow and steady, then exhaled until only calm remained. There, the faint silhouette of a figure prone along the opposite roofline, framed against smoke-stained sky. The German's rifle still smoked, his form steady, cold, certain of victory. But this time Daniel was already ahead. One breath. One squeeze. The rifle bucked against his shoulder. Across the street, the phantom shuddered. His body arched, then crumpled, the weapon slipping from his grasp. Tiles shattered as the rifle clattered down the roof and fell into the rubble below. The German slid limp against the slope, motionless. For a long moment, the city held its breath. Then, as if some invisible weight had lifted, the silence shifted. Soldiers began to move again in the streets, whispers replacing the fear that had gripped them. The unseen threat was gone. Daniel rose slowly, chest heaving with exhaustion rather than triumph. He crossed the rooftop, boots crunching over loose slate, and neared the fallen enemy. The man lay sprawled, face turned away, a dark patch spreading across his tunic. Daniel hesitated, rifle still in hand. He had won the duel, but what face would he find staring back at him? Daniel knelt beside the fallen sniper. The young man's face was pale, his blonde hair matted with dust, his eyes still open, ice blue, unblinking, staring at nothing. He could not have been more than a year or two older than Daniel himself. A son of Germany, shaped by a different land, a different creed, and yet no less human. For a moment, Daniel saw not a uniform, not an enemy, but another farm boy who might have once hunted deer in distant forests, taught patience by a father now long gone. Two sons of two nations, forced onto opposite rooftops, locked in a duel neither had chosen for himself. The wider battle still raged around them. Caen's liberation would come at terrible cost, street by street, house by house. The city had become a crucible of sacrifice. Yet in this single contest, the war's brutal truth had been laid bare, lives measured in heartbeats, survival decided by silence and instinct. Daniel rose, slinging his weathered rifle across his back. Without a word, he stepped down into the ruined streets, faceless among thousands enduring the firestorm of Normandy. And so I ask you, if you had been in Daniel's place, facing a sniper's duel where hesitation meant death, would you have taken the shot, or tried to capture your enemy alive?